Make the most of your Walt Disney World vacation.
The top 6 differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. Hi, I'm Herb Leibacher, and welcome to episode number 120 of the World of Walt podcast. Make the most of your Walt Disney World vacation for the week of July 2nd, 2017. This is the podcast for Walt Disney World fans, whether you're planning your next trip or just enjoy reliving a little bit of Disney magic. While both resorts have the word Disney in the name, the Disneyland Resort in California is in some ways similar to, and in some ways very different from, its sister resort, the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. There are plenty of things to love about both, but it's good to understand just how they're the same and how they're different before you take a trip to one after having visited the other. Today, we're going to explore the top 6 differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. To help me explore this topic, I'd like to welcome a guy who enjoys Disney whether it's on the East Coast or the West Coast, Russ Reeves. Russ, welcome back.
Thanks, Herb. It's good to be back and talking about not just one, but 2 of my favorite places in the world.
And if you're on one coast or the other, I don't think you can go wrong, whichever park you decide to visit.
That's right. It's like the old song, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And that's the way I am about Disney parks. My favorite Disney park is whichever one I'm in at the moment.
There you go. I think that's right on. Okay, so before the topic for today, the wonderful warm-up question is, which is your favorite U.S.-based castle, Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella?
Oh, well, if I'd had a moment to give some thought to this, I could have probably come up with some objective criteria to distinguish between them, and maybe put more thought into what I'm about to say. But I think the difference between the 2 castles really represents the difference between the 2 resorts. So they're both beautiful. They're both spectacular. One is quaint and charming. The other is massive and overwhelming. And so I think just in comparing the 2 castles, you really get an idea of how to compare the 2 resorts. All that said, I'm buying time to give an answer here. Because I do like them both. I'm going to go with the old line of reasoning, the absence makes the heart grow fonder. And so because it's been so long since I was at Disneyland, I'm going to say the Sleeping Beauty Castle at Disneyland, just because I really can't wait to see it again.
Oh, all right. Interesting choice. And I think your comparison of castle represents resort is a good one, and we could probably just end the podcast here, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
All right, thanks for tuning in.
But I think it really is we're gonna see that theme throughout today's discussion. And it's hard. How do you pick? What do you like, an apple or an orange? But for me, having grown up on the East Coast and having visited Walt Disney World as a kid and adult, I definitely am the fan of Cinderella Castle. And when I saw Sleeping Beauty Castle, I think I would agree. It's quaint and it's beautiful in its own way. You kind of get used to what you get used to, and the other one's like, oh, that's very different. But probably just because I grew up with it, I would have to pick Cinderella Castle.
Well, I think most people who grow up going to Walt Disney World, they go out to Disneyland, and at least this is true with most people that I talk to. I say, how was your trip to Disneyland? One of the first things they say is, the castle's so small.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is. I mean, but I guess the opposite is true. If your context is Disneyland, and then you find yourself in the Magic Kingdom, you probably think, wow, that castle's so big.
Yeah.
So they are quite different.
Yeah.
In fact, I think more different probably than any other 2 castles in any Disney park in the world, maybe with the exception of the new one at Shanghai, which just appears to be spectacular from everything I've seen about it. But, almost all the other castles kind of look somewhat alike, and these 2 are very different from each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. Probably people who grow up in China and go to Shanghai are going to come to Walt Disney World someday and they say, "Look at the teeny little castle you've got here. What's up with that?"
Is that it?
Yeah,
is
there's
that
no.
all you do is walk through it?
Yeah, where's the attraction? Where's the boat ride? Yeah, yep, agree. Okay, so we're talking about the top 6 differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. So you got number 1, Russ.
Okay, well, the first one for me is one of my favorite things about Disneyland, and that is the difference in the weather between the two places. Now, it's not specific to the Disney park. I know maybe I'm cheating a little bit here, but to me, this makes the difference in my enjoyment of the parks as much as anything. So in a few weeks, I'm heading out to Disneyland with my family, and one of the things I'm looking most forward to is walking around a Disney park without it being so hot and so humid. The last time I was there, I drove over to Anaheim from Phoenix. I was in Phoenix for some meetings and drove over to Anaheim for a few days of vacation, and that's actually what I'm doing this time, too. I'm going back to Phoenix for business. And in Phoenix, on that trip, the highs during the day were something like 117 degrees, and that's not an exaggeration. And people will say, oh, but it's a dry heat. But you have to understand, that just means it feels like 117.
Yeah.
If you add a little humidity to that, you could melt steel. We're driving across the desert to Southern California, and it was so hot that my GPS actually just fried. It just stopped working because of the intensity of the heat. But the point I want to make is that once we got to Anaheim, the highs, the whole time we were there, were in the low 70s. And that was in the middle of June. And so, we started and ended the day in long sleeves, and at one point had to go drink a cup of hot coffee just to warm us up. It made the entire day so enjoyable. And I think that's one area where Disneyland has a distinct advantage over Walt Disney World, where heat and humidity can cause you to break into a sweat within seconds of walking out of your resort room. It does get hot in Disneyland, but not as hot as Florida, and rarely ever as humid. And those afternoon rainstorms that you come to expect at Walt Disney World are also rare in Anaheim as well.
Yeah, and I think you see that in how the parks are set up as well. There are a lot more outdoor queues and spaces at Disneyland as opposed to Walt Disney World, where they know it's going to be hot and it's going to be humid and it's probably going to be raining. And so it just had to be set up differently. I tried to look up some information about humidity because you talked about that, and I think it's not just the temperature, it's the humidity. And Anaheim's average humidity is 50 to 70%. Orlando's is like 70 to 90, and during the day in the summer in Orlando it's 99. I think Armageddon will hit Orlando someday when it goes to 100 and the air just turns to water. It is that, and everyone will drown. It's that humid. So it makes a big difference. And it even makes a difference in how you plan to visit. So, I'm the big proponent of skip the parks during the middle of the afternoon, have a long lunch, go back to the pool, go back to your resort and take a nap. And I think in part you have to plan that way because the weather is so intense in Florida, and you just don't really have that issue as much at Disneyland. It makes a big difference.
It does, yeah. And, I think you see that also in the park hours. Disneyland is not usually open as late.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is because half the people aren't leaving in the middle of the day to skip the heat. You're there from open to close, and you don't need to go take a break somewhere and come back later.
Right.
So, you mentioned the way the attractions are set up. One of the most obvious examples I can think of is the Mad Tea Party.
Yep.
At Disneyland. It's beautiful. You've got these, paper lanterns strung over top of the attraction, and, it's no covering over it at all. It's just really so beautiful, and, it's so nice to take in all the scenery as if you can, as you're spinning around at the speed of light. But in Walt Disney World, it's covered over. It's sort of like you're under this roof, and it makes it very dark inside. But if it weren't, for one thing, probably all the electronic and electric components of it would be fried through the rain that comes, almost every day in summertime.
Yeah.
And the other thing is you would just melt. Standing in the line and then sitting in the attraction, you would just melt from the heat.
Yeah, huge difference in the weather, which just impacted everything, design, how you go about visiting, everything. So I think that belongs as our number one item and the difference between the two. So great one. So number two, I think it has to be on the list, and I'm going to talk about the size difference between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. And I think if you've only visited one, it can be hard to anticipate how different the other is. So Disneyland, 500 acres. Walt Disney World, 43 square miles. So I looked it up. A square mile is about 640 acres. So the property that Disneyland has, probably 1/50th the size of the property at Walt Disney World. Now, the property at Walt Disney World is not fully developed. A lot is set aside for environmental reasons. But it gives you a sense of how hugely different the size of these two resorts is. I think Disneyland is probably utilized every square inch because they have to, whereas Walt Disney World has got miles and miles of property that I think they're probably still thinking about what they want to do with it. And one of the famous quotes from Walt Disney is, here in Florida, we have something special we never enjoyed at Disneyland, the blessing of size. And I think that if you are used to one, it's sort of hard to comprehend how big a difference that makes on the other. So Disney World, 4 complete parks, 2 water parks. Disneyland Resort has 2 parks. Walt Disney World, it is an adventure to get from one place to the other. And that's why there are 3 monorail lines and boats and buses and soon gondolas, because it takes some time to get from one spot to the other. At Disneyland, you walk across the Esplanade and there you go. You're moving from one park to the other. So the size between these just has a huge impact, and it's just hard to imagine if you've only been to one and you're then visiting the other.
Absolutely. If you were to, say, step out from your hotel room and say, I'm going to walk around the circumference of Disney property, I don't even know how to estimate how long that would take you to do at Walt Disney World. At Disneyland, you could probably do it in under an hour.
Yeah.
You're talking about essentially something like maybe 6 city blocks. And to get from point A to point B, you could be in the deepest point in Tomorrowland in Disneyland, and you want to go to one of the resorts or to eat somewhere in downtown Disney or over into another attraction area in Disney's California Adventure. It's all just a relatively short walk, and very easy to get from point A to point B. I have an app on my phone that I have to use if I'm going to go from, say, the Contemporary to the boardwalk at Walt Disney World. I have to pull this app up and try to figure out the best way of 5 or 6 different ways to get there, whether it's using buses, monorails, boats, or some combination of them all. At Disneyland, you don't have to do that. You just walk. It's just right there. You just go.
Yeah.
It's all so close by.
Yeah, really, really different. And I think just like how the weather impacts how you have to consider your trip, I think the size impacts how you have to consider your trip. And your example was a great one. So, at Disneyland, if you wanted to go from the Disneyland Resort Hotel to the Grand Californian, you could probably stroll and it's no big deal. If you want to go from the Contemporary at Walt Disney World to the boardwalk, well, that's an adventure unto itself, and you have to plan out how you're going to get from one spot to the next.
Right, yeah, especially resort to resort like that. It's just not an easy thing to do.
Right, yep. You will be transferring buses, or you're going to need some planning on how to do that. Okay, good. So that was number 2. Number 3, Russ, back over to you.
So for my next one, I'm going to say dining. Dining is very different between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. We all know, I think, that when you're planning a Walt Disney World trip, you have to wake up at the crack of dawn 6 months ahead of time and nail down your dining reservations, or else you may go hungry. Now, you won't go hungry, but you may not get that restaurant that you are just intent on eating at. It's so discouraging to get on there 180 days, maybe 180 plus 10, depending on how long your stay is, and find that restaurant you've been dying to eat at has no availability. How is that even possible that far out? But that's the way it works at Walt Disney World. That is not the case at Disneyland. In fact, you cannot make reservations that far out at Disneyland. You can only make them 60 days out. And I think it's only one day at a time. It's not like 60 days plus the length of your stay like it is at Disney World. It's 60 days, and it's one day at a time. There are far fewer restaurants that require that reservation in the first place. Some, like Blue Bayou, which is housed inside the Pirates of the Caribbean, fill up pretty quickly, and some of the more upscale places do. But many more table service restaurants have walk-up availability at Disneyland than they do at Walt Disney World. I don't even try anymore at Walt Disney World. If I don't have a reservation, I just rule out table service dining. And, to help that even more is, I think, the counter service dining at Disneyland is, to me, more superior to Walt Disney World's in many ways. Sometimes I get bored with counter service dining in Walt Disney World. I feel like a lot of the menus are very much the same with a few twists. I mean, this place has a flatbread with these toppings, and then across the way, this other place has a flatbread with those toppings. And, how many different kinds of flatbread can you eat in a week? But although there are surely some special and unique counter service places at Walt Disney World, and I love them, I think that you can find more of that kind of unique counter serve dining and quick serve stops at Disneyland.
Yeah, very good point. And I think this reflects the nature of the different audiences, the different guests who go to one park versus the other, where Disneyland is primarily locals, where Walt Disney World is primarily people from outside of the immediate area. People from outside are making these plans, and have a business where everything gets booked up 180 days advance is pretty amazing. Well, one other thing I thought about is that if you choose to escape from the Disneyland property because of its size, you can do that, and you could walk out from the place where you buy your tickets, and in 5 minutes you can be at a Denny's and an IHOP and a House of Blues. But if you are on Walt Disney World property, because it is so huge, you just don't have those options to easily go to an outside source for a meal. I mean, you can, but it's going to take you 45 minutes or an hour or more. So I think the dining is really a big difference there.
Yeah, and you say, well, I don't want to pay these, theme park or resort prices for food, so I'm going to go off property and do that. Well, you have to factor in, time is money in some cases, and so if you had to lose an hour and a half to 2 hours to save $10, is it worth it?
Yeah.
And then you also encounter the thing where those off-property places are going to, in some cases, jack their prices up because of the sort of captive audience phenomenon. And so, I really don't think it's really worth the savings in most cases to do that. I think it's probably better to just adjust your expectations accordingly, maybe eat lighter, bring some snacks, try to get by on less expensive meal choices, things like that, rather than thinking I'm going to leave the park to go. Because honestly, even at Disneyland, I'm not leaving the park to go to Denny's.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to save that much money, and what I lose in ambiance and convenience and theming is totally not worth whatever I save to go to Denny's. So I'm just going to adjust my expectations. I'll take a granola bar in my backpack, and I'll have a light sandwich or salad somewhere, and pick up a snack here and there throughout the day, and that's it. When I get back to my hotel room, maybe I eat something a little more substantial or eat a bigger breakfast before I go out.
Yeah. And I agree as well that I've heard a lot of people say that they prefer the dining options at Disneyland. And I think maybe that's also tied into the fact that a lot more locals go there. And so they go there a lot. and they want different things because they've gone 6 times already this year. Whereas the folks who are going to Walt Disney World, I'm on vacation. Where's my hot dog? Because that's what I eat on vacation. So
yeah. I don't want to have my vacation ruined by eating something I'm not familiar with. So I'm not going to have the calamari or, whatever is on the menu, because I really just want to play it safe here and get a burger, or I just want to get something that's not going to weigh heavy on me before I go ride Mission Space, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And we keep coming back to it, but I don't think this is on either of our lists, but it is certainly a difference, and that is the clientele of each park, because Disneyland is very much a locals park, and it's very much an annual pass holder park.
Yeah.
As opposed to Walt Disney World being that tourist park that sort of a lot of people there are there for their once in a lifetime trip, or their once every so often trip or something. And so that definitely makes a difference in everything about both places.
Yep, absolutely. You see it. You see it throughout. You're right. Okay, that was good. Number 3, dining. So number 4, I'm going to talk about park hopping. So you can park hop at Disneyland, and you can park hop at Walt Disney World. And if you've been to either one of those resorts quite a bit, it's something you may want to do. Maybe you want to go in and just check out the things that are new. Maybe you have certain favorites, and you don't want to spend all day at a particular park. At Disneyland, I think I can say it's probably a little bit easier to park hop, because the entrance to the Disneyland theme park is, a few steps away from the entrance to Disney's California Adventure. And so if you want to do a park hop, it's not a time-consuming thing to do. At Walt Disney World, I think it's also worth park hopping for some people in some situations, but it takes a lot more time. And so you may have to take 2 monorails to get from the Magic Kingdom to Epcot. You're definitely going to be on a bus if you are park hopping from anywhere to Disney's Animal Kingdom. And so park hopping may be a good option in both places, but it's going to be a different experience, and it's one that's going to cost you a lot more time if you do it at Walt Disney World.
Yeah, definitely. I know people who park hop at Disneyland who go back and forth between the 2 parks multiple times, almost like you and I might say, let's go from Tomorrowland to Frontierland. Let's say we're going to ride Space Mountain and then go ride Big Thunder and then come back and do Buzz Lightyear and then go back and ride Splash. Well, it's about the same distance to park hop in California, between Disneyland and California Adventure. So park hopping becomes, for a lot of people, not just an add-on thing for their ticket, but really an essential part of their touring plan, because they're going from Radiator Springs Racers over to Big Thunder Mountain, and then at some point back over to ride California Screamin', and then they're coming back to watch the nighttime parade at Magic Kingdom, and so it just becomes a part of how they do the parks. Plus, like we said, going back again to the different clientele with the annual pass, why wouldn't you do that if you're an annual pass holder and you can do it so easily?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the idea of multiple park hops at Walt Disney World, from Epcot to Animal Kingdom to Magic Kingdom, I would say is just sort of unheard of. You may do one hop from one park to another, but you don't hear about a lot of people who try to take in 3 in a day, unless they're on some sort of a challenge or they've got a pass. Right. Getting from one place to the other is just part of the fun. So very different ways of touring those 2 resorts. Yeah,
for sure. And, I don't park hop usually. I'm kind of cheap, so I don't pay the extra for the park hopping function on the tickets. When I have had it, I've enjoyed it. It's nice to have options for a variety of reasons, as things may come up during the day. But certainly, I wouldn't think twice about doing it at Disneyland, because there's almost no risk involved. Whereas at Walt Disney World, you're always thinking, well, if I leave here and go over there and it starts raining or it's crowded or this attraction's down or something, then I've just given half a day to this. And, so it's definitely more to consider about park hopping.
Absolutely. And it will be interesting to see how Disney looks at park hopping at the Walt Disney World Resort with some of the new options that they've got, and some that are probably on the way, trying to make that a little bit easier, especially as I think people are going to be attracted to some of the new things that are coming in the upcoming years. But even so, it's still much bigger. It's always going to be a much more time consuming and, as you say, risky proposition to move from one to the other. But I think Disney probably sees that, and they're trying to do some things, and it'll be interesting to see in the next few years what that looks like and maybe how it impacts how people think about those jumps.
Yeah, well, we've seen some development in those areas. We've seen the express transportation that you can add on, for a cost to go from inside the park to inside the park.
Yeah.
Which is a time saver. And I've heard people who've done it love it. Again, I'm a tightwad, so I look at that and say, why would I do that when I can do it for free?
Yeah.
But then also we've just seen the plans for the gondola system. That's going to simplify park hopping, at least from studios to Epcot.
Right.
I already think that's a pretty simple park hop anyway. I think you could probably walk that faster than you could take any other means of transportation between the two.
Yeah.
And then there's rumors going around that seem to be gaining traction that Disney's going to launch its own sort of internal Uber kind of system with private car kind of transportation, with cast members doing the driving and providing information and offering the convenience of Uber, but with that Disney level of branding and service, and that's gonna enhance park hopping too, I think.
Yep, agree. And it'd be interesting to see how some of these things unfold.
Yes.
Okay, that was number 4, park hopping. So Russ, back to you for number 5.
Okay, so for my final one on my list is the difference between attractions. It's kind of a tricky one for me to think about because, on the one hand, I don't want let's just take Disneyland and Magic Kingdom as examples. I don't want those two parks to be carbon copies of each other. But on the other hand, if we find ourselves going to one or the other more often than going to both, it would be nice that if there were more things in common. There are times that I walk around Magic Kingdom and think, I really miss the Matterhorn. I wish the Matterhorn were here. Times when I'm stepping down into the Nemo subs in Disneyland thinking, I really wish that Magic Kingdom still had the sub ride. But so it's a bit of both. I like the fact that there are so many unique things about each park. I like the fact that there are some overlaps. Now, I'm going to make a proposition here that is based on very empirical data, and that being my own personal observations and opinions. I think that the attractions that Disneyland has, which are not found in Walt Disney World, are better, with few notable exceptions, than the attractions that Walt Disney World has that Disneyland does not have. So, like, for instance, one that comes to mind right off the bat is the Matterhorn. I think that Disneyland's Matterhorn is a better ride than a good number of attractions that you could find in Walt Disney World that are not in Disneyland. Now, there are some exceptions because Matterhorn has a cousin in Walt Disney World in Everest Expedition. And I think that is a far superior ride to the Matterhorn in almost every way possible. So there are exceptions, but I think the unique attractions at Disneyland are better on the whole than the unique attractions at Walt Disney World. Now, the other category is the attractions that they share. And here again, there are some exceptions, but on the whole, I think that the shared attractions are better at Disneyland than they are at Walt Disney World. That's all my opinion, very subjective, I know. I think part of it for me is that Disneyland sort of has more of that classic attraction feel, the attractions that are based on timeless Disney franchises, less of the sort of here today, gone tomorrow kind of identities in a lot of their attractions. But I just tend to favor the attractions that I find at Disneyland over the ones that I find at Disney World. But let's not say I dislike either of them or think that either of them are not well done or not enjoyable.
Yeah, this is an interesting area to discuss. And I've got to think that it's a constant analysis or maybe mind game for the people at Disney who plan these things out. So we just spent $100 million coming up with a new attraction, Radiator Springs Racers. And we could duplicate that at Walt Disney World and it only cost us, $30 million. But then that takes away from something that's special about Disney California Adventure. So I agree with what you were saying at the start, which is sometimes I think the differences make a park unique and maybe make it a stronger draw, so that instead of taking my vacation to Walt Disney World this year, I'm going to spring and go across the country to Disneyland. Where other times I think as a business and maybe for guests, it's nice if they're in both spots. So there's just a lot of angles to consider, and all the history too, and how the parks were built up and what was done in one versus the other. So really fascinating angle to this whole topic.
Well, and the example that you gave with Radiator Springs Racers is an interesting one, because there you have an attraction. This is what I'm talking about with the sort of shared attractions and Disneyland having the better version, because essentially Radiator Springs Racers is Test Track. But if you set them side by side, I mean, even if you're not going to go to both, just watch YouTube videos of both and say, now, which one is the better attraction? The theming, the atmosphere, the environment, everything about Radiator Springs Racers is superior to Test Track. Again, my opinion, I know. But there are other cases of that. One that comes to mind, Dinosaur in Animal Kingdom is the same attraction as Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye in Disneyland.
Yeah. Literally, same layout. Exactly the same layout.
It is the exact same attraction.
Yeah.
But the experience and the setting and the atmosphere and the environment, I mean, it's just no comparison. Disneyland is hands down a superior attraction.
Yeah.
In that comparison.
Yeah. And I think that's a prime example right there. So, I like Dinosaur. It's good. But Indiana Jones, amazingly better, even though it is the same track, exactly the same track, the same layout, the same ride vehicle technology, vastly different attractions.
I have a bad back, and whenever I ride those attractions, I get jostled around a lot, and I get off and my back really hurts. The Indiana Jones ride offers me something that's worth the backache to experience. And I feel like Dinosaur doesn't. I don't ever really want to ride that again, because Dinosaur doesn't offer me anything that makes it worth getting a backache for.
Yeah.
The Indiana Jones ride does.
Yep. Good point. Well, a lot of good stuff on the attraction differences there. Okay, let's jump over to the last item, number 6, and I'm going to talk about the differences in lodging. And the differences, I think, mirror what we talked about in size and probably in audience, even though it's not one of our official numbers here. But at Disneyland Resort, there are 3 hotels. So there's Paradise Pier, there's a Disneyland Hotel, and there's the Grand Californian. And if you add them all up, I think there are about 2,400 rooms. At Walt Disney World, there are 24 different hotels. You add them all up, there are 30,000 rooms. Everywhere from the Treehouse Villas, and there are 60 of those, up to Pop Century, and there are almost 3,000 rooms there. So the lodging situation, I think, mirrors the fact that Disneyland has locals and Walt Disney World has people coming for a destination vacation, and Disney has built out hotels to match up with those different audiences. I think Walt Disney World sure has Disneyland beat when it comes to the variety of on-site resorts, just because they have so much more room and so many more resorts, and the room to have them. So another big difference between Walt Disney World and Disneyland is the resort situation.
Yeah, and here's where I think Walt Disney World really has the advantage. When you're talking about Disney-owned and operated resorts, for many of the reasons that you mentioned, and just the cost comparison too. With over 20 resorts in Walt Disney World, you've got these 3 categories of value, moderate, and deluxe. and you can stay in a value resort. I've done the math on this. That you can get a really cheap room off property in Walt Disney World. But if that means you're going to have to rent a car and pay to park and deal with tolls, et cetera, get transportation to and from the airport, you will save money in a value resort, I think, more often than not.
Yeah.
At Disneyland, there is no value option in terms of a Disney-owned and operated resort. The cheapest, just for the dates that I've been looking at for my upcoming trip there, the cheapest room that I can find on Disney property was somewhere around $300 a night.
Wow.
Up to somewhere, that was at Paradise Pier for just sort of an average run-of-the-mill room. At other times of the year, maybe it's less expensive than it was for these particular dates, but that was the rates that I was given, when I looked for my dates. At the Grand Californian, starting somewhere around $600 a night.
Yeah.
So your options are basically you have 3 lodging options at Disneyland, and they basically all 3 of them would fall into the price range of a deluxe resort at Walt Disney World. You just bypass the value and the moderate category altogether.
Yep.
But the flip side of that is that in Disneyland, you can stay off property and be closer to the front gate of either of the parks than you could if you were staying in one of the Disney resort hotels. So I'm staying at a place. I may end up changing this reservation, but currently I'm staying at a place. I'm not going to name it because it does have some questionable reviews, and people will question my sanity. Okay, on the map, this place is practically the same distance from the front gate of Disneyland or DCA as the Disneyland Hotel. And whereas it would cost me somewhere around, I think I saw a price of maybe $580 a night plus tax at the Disneyland Hotel, I'm paying exactly a tenth of that, $58 a night plus tax at this particular hotel. Yeah. And so that buys me a lot of inconvenience and a lot of patience when it comes to things not quite being up to the same standard or having that sort of gold seal of Disney touches around it. I can put up with a little bit of a dirty room or, my furnishings being a little not up to date or whatever, because I'm paying for, my entire stay less than I would pay for one night at one of the Disney resorts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how so many of these aspects kind of play off one another or connected to one another. So you have more lodging choices at Walt Disney World. You have cheaper choices, but you have close, inexpensive off-site choices at Disneyland. Park hopping, you have more parks to hop at Walt Disney World, but it's a shorter hop at Disneyland. So it's interesting how all these factors play off one another. And in the end, you can have a preference. You can like Disneyland or you can like Walt Disney World, but they each bring their own set of unique characteristics, I think, to your vacation.
Yeah, and so I think really at the end of the day, when we set out all the comparisons and the differences and the pros and cons, I think what we're saying is it's a win-win situation. If you're trying to decide between going to Disneyland or going to Walt Disney World, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Because it's you're going to have a great vacation at either place, and you're going to find plenty to enjoy about both.
A bad day at either Disneyland or Walt Disney World is going to be better than a good day at the office.
And a whole lot of places, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I don't know that I've ever had a bad day at Disney, actually, to be honest with you.
Yeah, there you go. I don't think there is such a thing.
Oh.
Good.
I was in Magic Kingdom one day when it poured down rain for about an hour and a half, and I could not find a place that I could get inside because everyone had gone inside, and I was pushing a big stroller. My wife and kids went inside somewhere, and I was stuck outside. I got soaking wet. I would have been less wet if I jumped into Seven Seas Lagoon, and that still was not a bad day.
Yep, and you have a good story and a memory as a result.
That's right.
Good discussion. Top 6 differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. Number 1, the weather. Number 2, the size. 3, dining. 4, park hopping. 5, attractions. And 6, the lodging. So, Russ, as always, a ton of fun to talk through this with you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. This is one of my favorite topics. So glad we could talk about this one.
Me too. It was a good one. Today we head out to the music. You've got a friend in me, and yes, we have made it through the list of the top 6 differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. However, this conversation doesn't need to be over. I'd like to hear what you think. If you have a different idea or something you'd like to add to the list, you can do that by visiting the show notes page at worldofwalt.com/120. That page will work very well on your tablet, desktop, or smartphone. Leave your comments in the comments section and check out what other people are thinking as well. I'd like to thank everyone who's been in touch, and I'd like to invite you to follow me on social media, facebook.com/worldofwalt and pinterest.com/worldofwalt. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I would appreciate it if you would spread the word. Tell your friends and your family about it. Today, as always, I would like to give you a big thank you for spending some of your time with me. I'd also like to thank everyone who visits the worldofwalt.com site, where you can read interesting Disney articles and check out what other people are saying in the comments sections. By listening here and by visiting the site, you allow me to share the fun of Disney with you, and that is very cool. Thank you for being a part of it. So until next time, my friend, may God bless you.
Dream away. So there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.